So I wanted to make a game without using any game engine. Making a game in Unity is easy, but it feels a bit like cheating. But also, I didn't want to spend days and weeks watching tutorials on how to do this. So I decided to vibe code it. So, because I want to vibe code this game, there are some rules. First, I will be using AI extensively for my coding. Second, I will not follow any full-length YouTube tutorials. However, if I come across some obscure problem, I can look at only one tutorial. That's right, one. And third, I will not ask anyone for advice or help. So, with this rule set, now I have to decide what kind of game I'm gonna make. First of all, it has to be a 2D game, because 3D game, hard. It has to have simple mechanics, but also be challenging enough to make. Enter Terraria. So for this challenge, the end result should include a game like Terraria, which has a playable character, random world generation, block breaking and placement, and let's throw in a simple inventory in there as well. I need to decide what AI will help me through this challenge. I'm used to ChatGPT, but the word around the block is that Claude is better, so I'm going with Claude. Okay, let's ask Claude the most important question. So it seems we need to use some kind of library. It suggested 4 libraries: SDL, SFML, OpenGL, and Vulkan. Well, the last 2 are mostly for 3D games, so we need to decide between the first 2. Claude says that for our purposes, SFML is better, so let's go with that. Now starts the hard part, setting up SFML with a C++ project. Well, I tried to follow the instructions which said I should use VC package, but somehow it didn't work. I was getting errors and I had no idea why. After trial and error, I found a YouTube video explaining how to set it up manually, so here goes my one free YouTube point. After setting up, I was immediately stopped by another issue. So, SFML 3.0 is the newest version, and it has some different syntax than the older version. And get this, Claude doesn't know the new syntax properly. So because this would ruin my vibe coding experience, I decided to go with the older version for this. I finally managed to get an electric blue window up and running. So for the first step, I need to draw a sprite on the screen. I had no issues there. One prompt later, I got the player moving with the WASD keys. Also, the camera follows wherever the player moves. Now we need a world for the player to move around in. In a game like Terraria, the world is made up of tiles, or 2D cubes that are stacked on top of each other across the length of the world. So I asked Claude to give me a world generation code. However, it gave me all the code in one file, main.cpp, so I asked it to split up the logic into different files. I tested the code and it generated brown and gray tiles. Of course, I want the tiles to look like actual dirt and stone, so I went ahead and used ChatGPT's Sora to generate seamless dirt and stone textures. So the world I currently have is totally flat. We need some kind of variance to the terrain. Enter Perlin noise. Perlin noise is a randomly generated black and white image, the values of which we can use to either place a block or not to place a block. Claude managed to give me working code right away, but the parameters were way off, so I decided to try and play with the parameters. This took me longer than I would like to admit, and the result was just marginally better than what it was before. Next step is collision detection. It was quite easy, one prompt and it worked. I was quite surprised by how I encountered no issues. Afterwards, I added player physics, and for some reason Claude gave me code that made the player minuscule. At first I thought that the player has become invisible, but then I found the line where the player is scaled to a very small size, removed it, and it worked. I grew tired of looking at this ugly red rectangle as my player, so I decided to generate a Terraria-like character in Sora. I added it, but needed it to flip when I am moving in the other direction. Claude gave me the code, however there seemed to be an issue. The player got some weird offset when turning. It turns out that the anchor of the sprite is not at the center but at the top left. So I had to set the anchor to the center. However, this messed up my collision detection, so Claude gave me code which calculated collision dimensions according to the new origin. So this issue was easily fixed. However, later I will encounter an issue which took me quite a bit of head breaking to fix, although it should have been quite simple. Stay tuned for that. I also tried to generate a sprite of the character that is mid-air jumping, but Sora somehow messed it up, so I just dropped the idea. Next, we need to be able to break and place blocks. I asked Claude to give me code for that, but Claude had bigger ideas. It gave me the code of breaking and placing blocks, but it also gave me a full functioning inventory system. I was very surprised because after putting the code, both placement feature and the inventory worked seamlessly. The only tiny issue was that the text showing the number of items was bugged. After some back and forth with Claude, I suddenly realized that my game engine using Brain didn't realize that I need to actually add some kind of font to the project for the text to appear. So I added the font, tweaked the text position a little, and it worked. After this comes the part I told you about, the giant monster that made me almost give up trying to implement this feature. Enter Parallax. So in Terraria, the layer behind the actual playable world is made up of some images which move at different speeds as the player moves, giving this parallax effect. So I asked Claude to give me code for this. At first, it layered some colored rectangles on top of each other. I couldn't see if it was working or not, so I asked Sora to generate an image of mountains and an image of trees. It turns out the trees had no bottom and the mountains did not appear at all for some reason. I fixed the tree's background by extending it at the bottom, but I still could not see the mountains. And I need my mountains, man. So thanks to Git magic, I reverted the commit and asked Claude nicely to give me the code again. And this time I managed to get it working. Now the textures of my blocks did not work well with the new background, so I just created some very ugly new textures for dirt and stone. In hindsight, I could have done better, but I was running out of time, so this will have to do. At the end, I also added grass blocks, which appear on the topmost layer, and I fixed a bug that made sure that you can't place blocks where the player is standing, so the player doesn't get stuck. So after my very hard work of copy and pasting, I have the project. So this is the end result. It checks all the tick boxes I decided in the beginning, even though it is not so good looking, but it is a playable game made in less than 24 hours without any engine and only using code generated by AI with minimal tweaking. If this motivates you to create your own game even without knowledge of how to do so, drop a comment down below and subscribe for more awesome content.